What's going on, everyone? In today's episode, I'm excited to be joined by Connor St. Jean. He's an elite level pro natural bodybuilder and an online physique coach. Connor is a competitor who shows up on stage with the highest level of conditioning and muscularity, and he happens to be right in the middle of his 2025 competition season at the time of this episode. In our conversation, Connor shares all of the ups and downs of his natural bodybuilding story to show what all goes on behind the scenes over the years to accomplish such an incredible physique. I was honestly blown away by Connor's journey, and I know you're going to love the episode. So without further ado, let's dive into it. To start things off, can you share like a 30,000 foot view or an outline of your competitive career starting from your very first prep up until now?
Absolutely. So my first contest prep I would have conducted in the year of 2012. So that puts us 13 years back, and now I'm dating myself as I found out this year that by Canadian Physique Alliance standards, I'm considered a Masters 35 plus competitor. So I'm 35 years old now. So that I guess that first prep would have made me about 22, 23, kind of in that ballpark. So yeah, my first contest prep was 2012. I was quite interested in natural bodybuilding at the time. I read a lot of like the T Nation forums and got a lot of inspiration from some of the natural competitors on there. So if you're 35 plus like me, you might remember T Nation. It was like a magazine type online kind of hub that was a big pushing like lots of supplements and also had a great forum too, and it had cool articles from kind of seasoned writers like Christian Thibodeau, people like that. And so that I was really just engaged in the whole idea of building a physique with weight training, with diet. So my first prep would have been in 2012. And it's really funny looking back to think of just how I operated and, remembering the feelings that went into it. But I remember I started that contest prep at about 20 weeks out, and I thought I was, amazingly doing an amazing job, that I was, going to go more than 12 weeks, and even 16 weeks was considered a long prep then, but I started at 20 weeks out, and, I was a chunky boy, we had just bulked for about 4 or 5 years straight. And I actually started to work with a coach for that prep. And it was really interesting. He was dieting me at like probably like what was an appropriate pace, but of course, since I started so darn chunky, basically at around maybe the 13-week out mark with that coach, I realized that with his approach, he wasn't going to like get me to stage shape, and I kind of just knew that. And so I actually ended up working with a different coach who was like known to be more aggressive and assertive. And that's when that prep I'll always remember as the toughest prep for sure, because I remember at some point I was doing like 1,200 calories a day and doing like 90 minutes of like hard cardio, like we're talking mist cardio, like heart rate up to 130. And like I remember that diet. I think the hardest point there was like one day there'd be like both days would be zero carbs. There'd be like an A and a B day, and then the B day had like zero fats, and so it was like protein and veg only for a lot of those weeks, like 4 weeks out or whatever. And I had a lot of adverse reactions. Like I got some edema in my ankles. It was very odd. It was honestly probably one of the most challenging and hardest experiences of my life, and it still goes down today as the hardest prep I've ever done. But I will say that experience hardened me quite a bit in terms of like, okay, here's a great introduction to dieting and contest prep, right? And so I got on stage. I'd love to maybe share a photo with you of how I looked at that time, because it was not, it is certainly not what I had in my head, going into it. And I was looking at like other pros at the time, like Brian Whitaker, and being like, okay, Brian, he's like 5'9", 165. I'm 5'10", 5'11". If I'm 170, I'll probably be pretty comparable. And it's like, oh my God, dude, you have no idea what you're even talking about. It's not just a height and a weight. It's a look. It's experience. It's years of dieting. It's years of training, right? And so of course, but on stage there, I was very unhappy with how I looked, and then so I remember just kind of like breaking down a lot during that prep too. I almost dropped out the night before the show, and after the experience was said and done, I was like a little upset at how the final product was, and I guess it hadn't been enough to dissuade me from quitting. So the next year in 2013, I came back and, I spent a lot of that time too in between those shows thinking about, should I stay natural? The show I did was untested. So I was like, ooh, okay, like maybe the only difference is like, the supplementation part, quote unquote supplements, right? To make this like into a real thing that's a real presentable thing on stage, right? But fortunately, I stayed on the natural route, and there was a natural federation that was coming to my area the next year, and so I actually only had about 10.5 months between shows between 2012 2013. So I did another prep. I actually stuck with the same coach who I described that crazy diet with, and the prep was much better, much better. It was still hard, hard, and but there was no zero fat days, no 90 minutes of cardio. It was more reasonable, and of course, I didn't get as chunky. I think I peaked out at like 190 that off season, and noticeably got better. Like whatever muscle I'd lost, I got back. I retained as much leanness as I could, given the constraints of the off season. A little bit of growing, it's kind of a normative type energy intake. Not too excessive, and then the 2013 show was kind of like where I felt like I had like arrived a little bit because I put a decent package on stage. I was like probably the leanest guy in a class of 5, and I had come up on top against some people who had been bodybuilding for a while, right? They'd been bodybuilding for maybe 10 years, something like that. And it wasn't a huge show by any means. It was a smaller natural show, like a lot of them are. But I felt very very validated getting a second place finish, right, at that show. So I was like, ooh, okay, maybe I am like okay at this, right? And then that's when I just delved into natural bodybuilding more, and I was just more into it and started to research other federations like WMBF. And IFPA was big at the time, and just kind of got right into it. Got right into the whole natural bodybuilding thing, like through and through. So I ended up taking about a 3-year off season until I competed again, and so the next competition would have been 2016, and that would have been
Before
yeah.
so before we keep going, there's a couple things that I'm actually hoping we could rewind and zoom in on a little bit, like
Yeah.
starting from that first prep 2012. I'm wondering if you can actually elaborate a little bit more on, it sounds like it was insane. So from what you described, you were a little bit higher on the body fat percentage scale, as
Yeah.
you noted.
Yeah.
And so you had a good amount of weight that you needed to lose to be competitive on the stage. This was your first prep too. You started with an initial coach. He sounded like he had like a conservative, kind of like a standard, like a healthy approach, it sounds like, but you had a lot of fat to lose. So you switched coaches to a more aggressive approach.
Yeah.
I want to know if you can elaborate a little bit more on that aggressive approach. It sounds like it was quite uncomfortable. From what you described, you had like a no fat day, a low carb day. You're kind of carb and fat cycling, and the calories got really low, 1,200 calories. I'm just thinking about it, and I'm thinking, man, that must have been uncomfortable. But I'm wondering if can you talk more on that? Like, what kind of discomfort did you feel? Can you talk more about hunger, energy levels, some of the things that you were experiencing, how it impacted your lifestyle, what you learned from that really aggressive approach, and what that all entailed?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I remember like just it being like just so incredibly difficult to get up off the couch, and from all the cardio too. I remember like I became very inflamed, just like in my joints, like my ankle joint was pretty bad, and so I'd have to kind of switch from like elliptical to stairmaster to treadmill, and so that like just from an orthopedic standpoint, doing all that movement was seemed to be really hard on my body. So that was like the first kind of indicator, like, ooh, all this movement seems to like beat me up quite a bit. I remember actually, you're jogging my memory now. I remember going back to my gym at the time and trying to do a back workout and trying to get to a decent like some kind of level of volume or intensity, and by like set 8 or 9, I'm just dead. I'm just done, dead, nothing left in the tank, no push. Trying to do my best and like just trying to still trying to obviously maintain intensity on like everything I was doing, like with the weight training and the cardio, but just the overwhelming feeling of this is too much. This is too much physical load, right? And then the worst, most craziest thing was all the edema, right? And this is still something I get every now and again. It's not quite the same. And there's still some questions unanswered for me about why I got that then. But I basically at some point, whatever the deficit was so crazy low that the food I was eating just didn't partition normally, and I had like cankles. Like I had like if you're familiar with like congestive heart failure or something like that, people get ankle edema that is like pitting. So you could put your thumb into your ankle or any. It was really all over my body at some point, but you could put your thumb into your skin,
Wow.
and it would leave a massive indent just from all the water retention. And so it's hard to know exactly what the physiology of that was, but it was kind of crazy at the time because people at the gym would be like, "Oh, no big deal. You'll just cut your water; it'll go right away." You know what I mean? And it was like, no,
Yeah.
this is an above normative amount of water retention that this doesn't make sense for a natural competitor to be experiencing. Even people taking steroids would not experience that kind of level of pitting edema on the ankles, right? And so I remember being backstage at the show and people actually telling me, "Hey, bro, you might want to consider going to the emergency room actually instead of going to the
Wow.
night show." And the promoter even sent up I think a Pedialyte to my hotel room, right? Because he's like concerned. He's like, "I don't want someone dying at my show. This guy's looking a little funky here on stage. What's going on?" Right. So that was like one
Wow.
of the most embarrassing moments of my life, I would say, too, in terms of just like doing all that work and like having that kind of reaction to it was just quite the blow to my ego, to the work I put into that prep, to how much I suffered, on that diet. It was quite the ordeal, my man. I would say. Yeah.
Wow. That's
Yeah. Yeah.
so tough. That's so tough because I mean, I can imagine how difficult the prep was considering how aggressive you needed to be. You basically described with the cardio like you were actually hitting the wall. You were so active and you're dieting so hard. It sounded like it was really tough.
Yeah.
And then you get to closer to the stage and you can't even see the progress to the way that you want because of all of the
Yeah.
water retention.
And,
Do you think it was like? Do you think it looking back like it must have been related to stress?
I mean, it's really really interesting if you really look at like the hormone called cortisol. Like, I don't really think it's an agent of water retention from like a physiological level. I think people who have like chronically high levels of cortisol tend to actually like have the opposite type effect. And if
Interesting.
if it's too low, that can affect your water balance. I think it's if it, I'll throw this out there. If you look up refeeding syndrome, there seems to be a little bit of physiology behind that in terms of like they would take people who are like starved, like take like a Holocaust victim, but if they refed them too fast, they would get edema. My best guess is just I was in such a deficit at some point that the food I was eating was partitioning in a very, very odd way. Like the metabolism is getting so protective of the human body that the foods you are eating just aren't moving through your digestive system as well, and things are starting to back up. So you're really just getting like it's almost like people would say like starvation mode, or whatever. Which of course, like the way most people describe it is maybe inaccurate, but something about the metabolism and the digestion of the food you're eating and partitioning seems to just change. And it is still a bit of a mystery to me. And I would get similar effects like that on refeed days and later preps. Even this year a little bit, if I refed too hard and ate a bunch of voluminous foods, I'd still get just a touch of it. So it's like it seems to be a little bit unique to how my body reacts to the stresses of prep. It's not a very common thing that you hear people are carrying around like 10 pounds of water retention, right? But it seems to be a little individual to me, and there's like a little physiology that's behind it that's kind of a little bit in question or not exactly well researched or examined at this time. So it's quite interesting. It's quite the puzzle when it comes to that stuff.
Yeah, geez. Did you notice or do you remember were you having with the approach that you were taking, like were you able to take refeeds during that prep? Like did you do it like a big kind of a peak carb up before the show that kind of made the edema worse when by the time you got to the stage? Or were there like any patterns whatsoever that you noticed? Was it just like a constant state of edema or what do you think?
I'm trying to remember here exactly how it affected me. I do remember specifically the coach I was using at the time had like a cut water approach, which of course no one really does anymore. But I remember the Monday before the peak week, he like loaded me up on water, and I was getting all this, these jugs of water, and it seemed like that above normative fluid intake. Just like there was one day where I gained 10 pounds on the first day of the peak week. I remember waking up, being on the scale, like, okay, Connor, don't freak out if your weight's up. Something looks weird. And I was up from like 170 to 180, or something like that
Wow.
with
So like
with the
all of the
water.
water kind of stuck to you.
Yeah. Which shouldn't be what happens, right? Usually, you should just pee up the excess, right? So something is just isn't partitioning correctly, right? Um, in terms of refeed days, the coach I was working with just I felt I was behind, and like I remember being on the treadmill at in my parents' basement. I think I was watching The Walking Dead at the time. That was a popular show, and I was waiting for my coach's response because he said this was like this is a huge emotional moment. He said like the week before, he was like, "When was your last refeed?" And I was like, "We haven't had done a refeed the whole prep. I think I was with him at 13 weeks out." He's like, "Okay, send pics on Monday, and we'll see if you need a refeed." And so I remember just sending the pics, waking up, doing the cardio, getting through it, and being like, "Coach is going to give me a refeed. Coach is going to give me a refeed," and then getting the email back being like, "Huh, you're not that flat. Let's just keep dieting." And then so I was like, "Oh man!" And then at one point I did break down to him, and I was like, "Dude, I'm at the verge of just physically and mentally breaking down. Like, could we do some kind of strategy with some carbs?" And I think he gave me like 130 carbs, and that was the only refeed we had until it was the Wednesday before the show. Um, I can't remember it getting if it got worse on the carb up of peak week probably. At the same time, there was all these water and sodium manipulations happening at the same time, but. I do remember the edema kind of actually starting to fade a little bit during the show, which kind of makes sense because you're kind of like finally resting up, getting the fatigue down, and some of the food is kind of going through you a little bit. So I remember like by the night show and on that first show at the first show, there was like it was starting to like go down a touch, and then the next few days it was still a little like it was still there, like the days after the show. And I went to a walk-in clinic. They looked at me and they gave me a prescription for diuretics basically, and so that actually I had to when I did future natural shows, I had to tell them, hey, by the way, in 2012, I had to do this one course of diuretics, which was not competitively related, but because I had this ankle problem, and so I had to tell that to the polygraph and WMBF for all the shows I've done. Except this year I won't have to because it's been over 10 years. But yeah, I remember that moment as well too. And so those are some of the things that went into it. Yeah, so that was kind of that first show experience. It was pretty bad. It's basically like a horror story. Now that I'm describing it and reliving
Well,
it with you. Yeah.
it's crazy. I keep thinking like you put in all of that work into it, and then it just not getting the look that you'd worked so hard for must have been really, really hard. I'm wondering, and you even described it as almost being embarrassing.
So embarrassing.
What was it? Yeah, what was it that left you finishing the competition feeling like, hey, that was like embarrassing and that was so hard. I worked so hard for that and it just wasn't the result that I wanted. What was it that left you getting after it and like prepping again for the next year? A lot of people I think would have had an experience like that and then said like, hey, this whole natural bodybuilding thing like is not
Yeah.
for me. Like what was it that led you to just like going immediately right back for it?
I think in my heart of hearts, I wanted to redeem myself and I wanted to prove that I could be good at it. And I think at that point, natural bodybuilding was becoming part of like my soul, basically, which it kind of sounds a little cheesy, a little corny, but it just felt like, God damn, I still like this training stuff. I still like bodybuilding, despite all the challenges. Like, I just want to improve. Like, I just need to get that maybe like validation or just show that people that I can do this, that I'm working hard, that like, no, it wasn't because I like went insane on my diet like 2 weeks out and binged and a bunch of stuff that I looked like that. It's just because like literally my body was just stressed to the max, and there was some adverse reactions that no one in the industry really knew how to handle at that time, right? So there was a lot of unknowns. That was like the infancy of online coaching too. It's like there was like maybe 5 to 10 people doing online concept coaching, and obviously the industry has grown so much, and we see so many more advancements in terms of how athletes are being managed, right? We see so many coaching advancements. The field grows very fast. It's very competitive now. It's very saturated. But back in the day, it wasn't like that. So it was just, I think that need to redeem myself kept me going. And I just never, as soon as I was done, I remember saying to myself, I just want to feel normal and I just want to be able to train again. Right. And so that's what I did. I got back to feeling normal and I got back to training. And then I just needed to go again for whatever reason. I don't know. I probably sound like a crazy person just in listeners, but this is that show. It was quite the experience. And I do think if I could put a silver lining on it, it did kind of like show me like okay, this is how hard it can be, right? It toughened me up. It sounds, like obviously you don't want to expose someone to that much fatigue and that many problems, but if you want to show them what the hard prep could be like, that was a good one to kind of get your feet wet and see, okay, this is how extreme this stuff can be, in some circumstances, right? So, part of me has a bit of a wild side that's a little bit, likes to push hard and has a lot of passion. So, certainly, it maybe appealed to those aspects of my personality, which I think I've gotten a little bit more moderate as I've gotten older. But the 22-year-old version of me was just like we push, we push, we push, right? And that's kind of how that experience went. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because I think a pattern that most people would recognize is that the people that end up accomplishing the most significant things, like that have the most incredible accomplishments, seem to go through some pretty tough patches in their lives at some point, or they go through some kind of a tough experience at one point or another that ends up toughening them up, or they end up learning a lot from whatever they experience, and that ends up shaping them to accomplish whatever it is that they've accomplished. Like I'm thinking about other of the best natural bodybuilding competitors. Like first person that comes to mind is like Jeff Alberts, thinking back to his early years of competing. And I know that
Yep.
I actually just met with him last week, and we recorded an episode, and he described some of the tough things that he experienced through his first several preps. So
Yep.
it seems to be a pattern that like you kind of go through these tough things, and it kind of helps to potentially shape us to become better in the future. I think, speculating a little bit, but
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, so 2013, the next year, you're right back on the wagon. And you mentioned earlier that this prep was a little bit more smooth. You worked with the same coach.
Yeah.
You came second for this show, right? So what was it that made the prep a little bit smoother? Was it just like you started a little bit leaner so you didn't have to diet as hard? I think is that
Yep.
what
I
can you say
think
on that?
if I remember accurately, I started that prep at 16 weeks out, and my weight starting, I think the 2012 prep would have been like 207 or something like that, very soft. And I think my weight for the starting point of the 2013 prep was like 190, with maybe a little bit more muscle than I had in 2012, and retaining a good amount of that suffering that dieting I had done in yes, retaining a good amount of that leanness I had in 2012. And then so starting much leaner and then giving myself almost as much time, being 17 pounds lighter, basically starting that prep. And so that's when, that prep during dieting, I started to see those hints of like quad and glute striations. And I look back and I was like, man, like in my head, 23, I was like, man, I'm peeled. I look back and I was like, okay, well, there's, this leanness thing can go pretty far if you really look into the leanest competitors. But like at the time, it was quite satisfying to see that transformation to this age condition that I thought was like that represented my kind of body of work and dedication, right? So that was like very gratifying to see that kind of redemption arc that happened that year. And then like I said, then I felt like I had kind of found my place, a little bit, and I was like, hey, you're all this work you put in, it kind of paid off. You finally get that validation with that second place finish, right? So yeah, that's kind of how that one ended. Yeah.
Cool. And then you mentioned after that, you took 3 years. It was like a 3-year off season or improvement season. You
Yep.
also mentioned too, like you thought for a minute about like, should I do enhanced bodybuilding? Should I stay
Yep.
natural? What was it that kept you on the natural path and not going the other route?
Yeah. A few things. So number one, I was like, well, I haven't really tried my hand at an actual natural show, right? And I know that the prep was a bit of a disaster. So I was like, I don't really know exactly where where my true potential lies in a real drug tested show, right? And so I was like, well, I can't, I got to at least give myself another chance. And with that show being close to my area, it's like a 90-minute drive. I was like, I got to give it a shot and see. Like, so it'll be a way different experience. The playing field will be even. I'll have a better prep. Let's see how we turn up here. And then as well too, like doing my research on the performance enhancing side, I came to a few different conclusions. And so the one thing I really, really, really didn't like was how you'd have to buy these drugs from like underground labs, right? So they're not controlled per se in terms of quality, and so that really sketched me out. And another thing too was the need for a doctor to follow you, and most doctors don't want to touch that stuff, and I do not blame them, man. They're professionals. They want to keep their license good. They don't want to encourage or basically be able to make it happen that someone is on these substances and are following them. So that was another thing. I was like, if I can't willingly get a doctor, if these things aren't even, they're like black market, that's a big kind of a red flag for me, basically, right? So those were some things that dissuade me from it. And then the thing that kept me on the natural path was like, Connor, you don't really even know like how good or bad you are at this, or like how worth it is to you, because you haven't really given it a fair shake yet. You're still quite new in the game. So let's just ride it out. And I think the progress I was making, even though it was slow, was gratifying enough to keep me on that path. And it just kept me engaged, kept me happy, and I just kind of continued through that. And then I felt satisfied. So I just was like, why change? Why take these risks? For just the same thing I'm already doing, basically, maybe on a bit of a smaller scale. But hey, I was happy, so I just kept at it.
Right. That makes sense. Okay. So the improvement season, the 3-year improvement season, can you describe what that was like, and also what the next show was? This was when you're like finally starting to look at like WNBF competitions that were tested more or less.
Absolutely. Remember over that offseason, I worked with like several different coaches, right? And this is like a big like kind of discovery time for me. That would have been the time in that period where I would have worked with Jeff Alberts. I also worked with I'll start to name drop here now that we're out of the bad experience part. I worked with a coach named Eric Scott, who still to this day we text each other back and forth. He's still competing. We're still in love with natural bodybuilding. I worked with some other coaches as well too. And so I was just kind of like in my big learning period then and trying to get better. And I knew I needed more muscle mass for sure, right? It's still 2025 and I still need more muscle mass. But, I was just, trying to figure out how I can do this. And I remember there was lots of like kind of questions in my head. Should I bulk heavy? Should I not? Like, what's going to work? And I did actually get really, really heavy. I ended up, because I just kind of get frustrated with like what I perceived to be a lack of progress, or like what I thought, like kind of the grass is greener approach. And I bulked up all the way to 224 that year, right? At some point, and I tried to stay leaner post-show 2013. For a while, it was cool. That was when, as well, too, like when IIFYM and macros were a big thing. So I switched kind of my food approach to like from bro kind of fear-mongering foods, thinking, carbs make you fat, or like you can only have certain types of things like that. And it's kind of like starting to understand energy balance a little bit better. Right, that was a big thing. Like that used to be questioned a lot back in the day. Like people, like it was a big debate. Like, do calories and energy intake matter, or is it just food choices? Right, and it was. I don't really see people question that anymore. Right, everyone now kind of understands how this stuff works more or less in terms of like muscle gain, body fat loss, and so it was a big thing for me too. Once I realized I could, have like some sauces or whatever, like some low calorie sauces. And just some like foods outside of the bro normative, different types of vegetables, that this felt a lot more sustainable for me to do in terms of just like being able to eat kind of like a more variable diet. And I was like, okay, so this is it's getting a little bit easier now. This is getting more palatable in terms of like long-term adherence. Okay, so this is good. And then as well too, like that huge bulk up kind of came out of just like, oh, I'd stayed lean for a while. It doesn't seem like things are really like moving that quickly. And obviously, I'm a little bit more mature now, and I know that muscle gain is slow, and you don't really have a good eye to assess it on the week to week when you're in your off season. So I think that bulk up was quite excessive, to be fair. But I did move forward. I remember being like, at the end of that, I was like, I feel big. I put on some size, right? It did move the needle for muscle mass for sure. And I remember that year 2016, I worked with a great coach named Brian Ahlstrom, who would have been like on a level playing field with Cliff Wilson at that time, in terms of like the competitors he was putting on stage. He's no longer coaches anymore. Basically, he got busy with family stuff. But I remember working with him, and it was a great prep. Like we were doing like 300 grams of carbs on refeed days. There were high days. There was at some point there was like a 3 low day one high day cycle, and I was like training well, doing a normative amount of cardio, and I felt muscular. I felt big, and then so I ended up that year, I think, getting on stage like 6 or 7 pounds heavier than I was in 2013 with way better conditioning. So it's like I did strike forward quite a bit in my physique at that time. I remember feeling like, ooh, okay, I get some stuff to show. Like I get some goods now to compete, basically, right? And at that time too, 2016, I thought I got insanely inside out peeled. Now, as I go back and look, I was like, okay, there's still a few things left to be desired in the conditioning department, but for me, it was still a new milestone. That's when like the glute striations were more and more present. I mean, under lighting and filters, dare I say, maybe some friendly lighting assisting those there, but I had some good details. I had a little bit of size on my arms and my legs at that time, and I was like, this is amazing. Like I was able to strike forward a little bit more yet, right? And so that year I did 2 shows back to back. I did the 2016 Monster Mash. Unfortunately, my peak week for that went really, really bad, and that was maybe where the coach kind of slipped up a little bit. I spilled over quite a bit for that show, Monster Mash 2016. That was a huge disappointment, actually. That was probably almost a bigger disappointment than that first show, because at this time I thought, I had the goods to maybe contend for a pro card, WNBF pro card at that time. It was a big show. I was in good condition, above average, I would say, compared to the rest of the field. And then the overcarbing at the end, the backing up of food, I was quite smooth on stage. So I have some very disappointing pictures from the morning where I woke up to the stage time, 2016. That was probably a big disappointment. Doing all that traveling too to the States from where I was, that was probably one of the biggest disappointments actually in my whole career. Was just how I showed up at the time the judging was happening with that strategy. So that was a big thing in my head for a while. Was that kind of like quote unquote failure, or just not failure, but just like that kind of last minute mistake that can cost you a little bit, right? So
Was that if I can ask, was that, you mentioned like your carb up, was it like a Cliff Wilson styled like rapid backload, tons of carbs the day before, or what did that look like? What do you think led to the spillover the next day?
No, what it was is I remember talking to Brian. And this is when the rapid backload was gaining popularity. It was in full swing, and you'd see pictures like Cliff would post. He'd post it with almost no context. He'd be like 1,100. This is like on Facebook. He'd be like 1,100 grams of carbs, 11 grams sodium, 9 liters of water, and it would just be like the most shredded, conditioned bodybuilder you've ever seen, basically. And that's all he would post, and people were like amazed by it. And I remember asking Brian, I was like, "Does this rapid backload, is this a thing we should be doing?" And he's like, "No, I think as long as you get glycogen in the right spots at the right time, it's the same result, right?" So I remember that peak week exactly. Actually, the Wednesday before was 500 grams carbs. The Thursday was 400. The Friday was 300. But it was the show day food that did me in, right? So looking back,
Okay.
Friday night pictures, you could see I was like spilled a little bit. Now I was full as a house for sure. There was a point of muscularity that I'd never seen, but like the lines were being blurred the night before Friday. And then the show day food was excessive. It was like wake up, have a 9-ounce sweet potato with steak and peanut butter, and then have a breakfast sandwich and then a donut before stage. And it was kind of one of those things where he's like trying to keep, like, he perceived me to have this ultra fast metabolism, right? But the show day food was just too much. And I was already at the point of kind of spilling the night before. I think what would have been more successful is just waking up and having some water and eating nothing, honestly. Would have been great. I would have been sharp that way, and having the glycogen kind of come down through the day a little bit would have been good from where I was at Friday. But you live and you learn, right? And so I remember talking to him after, and he was like, "Man, I had you eating too much food the day of the show. Like, I'm sorry." He was telling me to during the show. He's like, "Go move around, go walk, try and pump up." And like it did kind of like calm down a little bit. He's like, "Are you hungry?" I was like, "No, I'm like, I don't really want to eat that much." And he's like, "Okay." So and basically after that, I learned what spilling over meant. At the time, I had no idea. It was unexplored. I didn't really even know what was going on, but I remember being quite disappointed. And then showing the judges the next morning, Dwayne Broadway in the elevator. I was like, "Look at this," and I flexed my quad for him. He's like, "I would have seen that on stage. I would have noticed that yesterday, real good." He's like, "That was on stage," and I was like, "I know, man. I overcarb." He's like, "That can happen. That can happen." He's like, "I have to figure out, how do you get that?" And I was like, "Dude, I've been like this for the last 3 weeks. Like, this is nothing new. I just missed." I just missed,
Yeah.
right? So that was dissatisfying for sure, for sure.
That's really tough. I had a similar experience in 2020 2021. I self-coached that prep, and like I think I did my carb up was okay, and it was similar with me. It was, I think, what really spilled me over, and it looks like I went from being like really hard. I wasn't as conditioned as I was the next season in 2023 that I did, but I was still looked, I think, above average as far as conditioning goes. And I feel like the look that I accomplished when I was on stage was like I looked like I'd gained like 10 or 15 pounds of
Right.
whatever
Yeah.
retention that came from my food selection. And what I think it was I spiked up my fiber the day before and sodium. It was like a deadly combination of too much veg, too much sodium. I was putting like lots of like I was very food focused at the time. I was
You're
like
starving. You're
fixated on
starving. You want more food. I know. I know.
you,
Yeah.
you know how it is. And I was like mustard on everything, hot sauce and everything in excess. And like,
Yeah.
I think that did it. I think that was enough for me to look like I was 10 pounds heavier than I was. And like, not a good 10
Not in a
pounds.
good way. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But it's tough. I know I really struggled with that mentally. So I'm wondering, how did you mentioned that this was almost more difficult than that first really tough prep with all of the edema. How did you get through that? Like what did you feel, and how did you kind of get past the disappointment that you might have experienced from that spillover? I wanted to quickly interrupt this episode to let you know about the work that I do. I work full time as an online physique coach, helping my clients to accomplish their muscle growth and fat loss goals by optimizing their approach to strength training and nutrition. I've been doing this work since 2018 and love helping my clients to transform their bodies and ultimately their lives. If you've been considering getting some help with accomplishing your own physique goals, you're invited to hit the link in the description below to learn a little bit more about the work that I do and how I can help you. You can even use that link to schedule a free video consultation with me. If you have any questions about my coaching or how I can help you, just email me at sam@jadeathletics.ca. All right, let's get back to the episode.
I'll be super honest. It took me 3 years to get over it. I thought about it. I would have dreams at night about it. Actually, to be honest, I was like, I got to redeem myself. I got to, be, I got to come in better, and I can't spill over, right? And I think it's really tough too. Like the athletes who get on stage, they go through a lot mentally, right? So you want to be full enough to show off all your muscularity, and you can never be too muscular in a natural bodybuilding show, right? So you do like the carbs are an aspect of fullness, right? But they're not everything. They're not everything. Some of being full on stage is like not over dieting, spacing out the prep well, and then also like your fluids and your sodium pre-stage, and also the carb timing. They need to be in the right spots for the right time, and then you don't want to. You maybe don't even need that much food in your system the day of the show. It's not necessary, right? So, carbs just aren't everything when it comes to fullness. Like that's and you don't want to hear that, starving competitor. You want to eat food, be happy. Like, yeah, I want the rapid backload. I want 1,000 grams of carbs the day before the show, and I want to eat Reese's backstage and have rice cakes with peanut butter and honey on them and stuff like that. I want that. I'm hungry. I've dieted for a while. I'm well below my body fat set point. Give me all the food. And then you're also thinking, oh, I'm kind of small too. Like I need to be big, right? So that it's quite the learning experience. But to get over it, it took. It wasn't until 2019 when I did my next show that I felt like I had redeemed myself from that. So I took another off season again. It's again trying to put on muscle. Once again, got up to 224 pounds for no good reason. And then I definitely think I pushed forward a little bit in muscularity. Maybe not as to the magnitude between 2013 to 2016, but certainly I put on some size, especially like hamstring area, mid back. I think came up quite a bit that year. But a lot of things still were missing, I would say, in terms of an overall package of muscularity. But I still push things forward. And then that year, 2019, I decided to self coach, right? And so because I was kind of frustrated with that whole spilling over thing, I kind of like lost maybe some of my trust in coaching, where I'm just like, ooh, like, okay, I know some things about my body that it's going to be hard for someone just to rock up to a prep and, have them all have that figured out, and then, like I said, the trust component was maybe a little bit missing. And I also wanted to, at that time, kind of like start doing some coaching myself and show, hey, I can walk the walk here. I know the science, I know the application, and kind of promote myself as a coach a little bit, right? So I decided to self coach that year. I remember I started my prep in January. I was 224. And then the prep lasted 10 and a half months, I believe, all the way to October, and came down all the way to a low weigh in of 170, right? So we're talking 54 pounds over 10 and a half months. So that was a big prep. Once again, there's probably no reason to be that heavy starting out, but that's kind of what I knew at the time. And, I was able to get myself, into some pretty decent conditioning, which, of course, at the time, too, I'm repeating myself, but I thought, like, hey, this is the pinnacle of conditioning. I've reached it. And now I remember looking back at those pictures a few days ago, being like, ooh, got a little bit harder in later years, go a little bit more tight. But once again, in my mind, it was like still very gratifying to get that conditioning. That's when there was like glute striations all the way through, some quad feathering, a little bit of feathering on the triceps, things like that. Didn't quite have the muscle development in the lats to show any details there yet because there wasn't enough muscle there. But overall, I was being like, ooh, I feel like I'm throwing a fastball here into the lineup. And that was the year I won my pro card in the WNBF. And so that season too, I did a warm up show with the CPA, very small show. I won both my classes in that. That was quite the push forward. I had 10 weeks between shows. I dieted harder, lost another 5 pounds. That was really, really tough too. I think that 2019 prep was like close to 2012 in some ways. Being self coached and kind of like ramping things up every week. Step counts kind of creeping up. You got to keep outdoing myself in terms of the dieting metrics, right? And then stopped doing high days and did some like pretty intense digging periods, pretty fatiguing, talking like 25K steps, some days a little bit of cardio in the mix, 1,600 calories, not 1,200 but 1,600, and trying to get that crisp conditioning that I know is a difference maker. And so that was tough self-coaching too. But I remember that year I had a lot of digestive issues, right? I was really trying to do some volume maxing with the food approach. And so that was one of the hardest parts of that too prep, because I constantly had gas and bloating and just felt terrible in my stomach the whole time. But I also couldn't seem to take myself away from like eating all these like huge salads, things with dancing gum, Walden Farms dressing. I couldn't seem to like untether myself from that. It's like I almost like was addicted to it at that point. And I was addicted to trying to like stuff my stomach full of food, right? So that made the prep really, really hard. I remember like researching like what's going on, but it was really just the food volume was too much, right? So that made that prep really hard as well. But I was able to pull it together. 2019 Natural Mania, I was middleweight that year and ended up winning the overall as well too. Nancy Andrews' show, I think it was in September. And then I felt like, hey, this is some good validation, winning the pro card, right? And there was still some things the day of the show. I still think I maybe overate the day of the show, a little bit of nerves. The prejudging look was good. The finals look, maybe not as good, but still pushed me forward enough to get the overall there. So that was amazing. That was like, I finally kind of redeemed myself from that spillover of 2016, because I knew I was close in 2016. Of course, I made the improvements and then came in, more or less on the money in terms of timing for stage. So that felt good. And then I felt like, I had to redeem myself from that mistake, basically. Yeah.
Can you talk more on the simple duration of the prep? 10.5 month long prep, had to lose around over 50 pounds. Can you, a lot of people hear that and they think, holy crap, like 10.5 months of dieting, like how do you do that? And I'm listening to you describe it too and thinking like it wasn't just like a conservative, it wouldn't have been just like a conservative 10.5 months. It's like you had days where you're stepping 25, you're getting 25K steps, and you were dieting to the point of like feeling like you needed to basically bloat yourself to, I'm guessing that was like a byproduct of like needing to feel full. I've definitely been there. That's for sure. I still kind of have to fight that a lot of the time. But can you talk a little bit more for anyone that's thinking like, holy crap, 10.5 months of dieting, like how, from a mental perspective, do you diet for that long consistently?
Well, to be fair, I feel like the first leg is pretty easy, right? Because I'm way over my body fat set point at 224, right? And so this is where too it's like, it's gonna the experience is gonna be different for everyone. Maybe people at the 224, that's kind of, or that, like, say that with the relative body fat level that I would have been, that's where their normative is, right? So I was way above my normative, right? Probably my normative would be like 190 or something like that, right? That would feel comfortable, clean, consistent, good energy, right? So the first leg isn't that hard. We're talking dieting on like 2,800 calories. It actually feels good to get that first little bit off. So the first, let's say, 6 months are like no big deal, I would say, in terms of at least the way I experienced it, other than just having to track, right? And there was no volume tricks at the first, right? There was nothing like that. It was just kind of straight regular bodybuilding food, feeling like a little hungry between meals every now and again. I remember getting down to that 190-pound mark. And obviously, if you lose 25 pounds, 30 pounds, you're gonna feel it a little bit. So I remember like taking a bite of steak at like 190 and being like, "Ooh, this tastes above average, normal, good food reward here." So which isn't maybe the best sign if you still have another 20 pounds to lose, but I remember that moment as well too, being like, okay, the food reward's kicking up, and I think too, in my mind, chasing satiety and chasing fullness and feeling satisfied was going to make the prep easier, right, rather than harder. And so that was a mistake on my end, right? It actually made the prep way harder than it needed to be. And I try to tell people this too. It's like, the food reward's a very interesting component of prep. You know, um, the food reward's going to kick up the leaner you get. And if you really lean into that food reward, it can be pretty dangerous. Like, you can, firstly, you can just lose all your productivity during the day, right? You can just spend an hour making and eating a meal, thinking about what you're going to make, trying to like change it as you go to get the right flavor profile and things like that. It can just consume you, right? So sometimes it's good to really lean out of that food reward. Sometimes that makes it easier on your mind, easier on your body. Maybe you have a little bit more hunger going on, but maybe that's easier than being constantly bloated and just being kind of tethered to this food reward cycle, right? Stay busy, stay active, try not to think about it too much. Maybe that's the easier route. I would say for me, it is, at least, as I've learned through the years of prepping, right? So I would say that, is one of the things. And then I will say the last 10 weeks of that prep were hard. They were tough, man. I was in decent condition for that warm-up show, but not straight through by any means. Like, I had a nice pop to my muscle. It was rounded. It was good. There was separation. You could see everything, but it wasn't tight by any means. So that last 10 weeks was tough, man. I remember thinking like, ooh, do I have to be really this fatigued for like, 9 weeks in a row? I guess so, so that was those last 10 weeks were hard. And that's when the digestive issues started to kick up too. And so that was tough. That was tough. And then also too, being the first time I was self-coaching, no kind of external source to kind of keep you going or to keep you reassured, kind of just going by your own intuition, was an extra layer of difficulty as well too. Even though I wanted the autonomy, there was also some drawbacks that came with that too, with a little bit less kind of maybe accountability, or just even having more flexibility in terms of you can do anything, check-ins are at any time. You can change your plan at any given day, at a different moment, based off of just how you're feeling emotionally, right? And I'm a huge emotional person. I feel a lot of emotions. I'm very up and down in terms of that sometimes. Like, I'm not a wreck by any means, but man, this stuff is important to me, and so I get emotional over it. So I can make emotional decisions sometimes, right? So, that was a tough component of it as well too. But yeah, that was kind of that experience. Some of the good moments and the hard moments as well.
I'm curious to get even more context, especially of that 10-week period leading up to the show. How are you balancing like the rest of life, considering at this point there were the digestive problems or issues, and there was a good amount of food focus. You were thinking a lot about food. You're physically feeling it. Were you at the time, like, were you coaching clients? Was that your 9 to 5? Were you doing stuff on top of this? What was your like lifestyle outside of bodybuilding looking like, and how are you kind of meshing the two together?
It was quite the interesting time in my life, actually, because of that year, I had been, for the last 4 years, I had been working as a paramedic, right? And then I stopped basically around January because there was a whole bunch of issues with me in that job, basically. and it just wasn't something that I was going to continue to do. So I was kind of like in between jobs, basically. There was a period of time where I was on unemployment insurance, actually, and I was doing a little bit of coaching, but it was very small at that point, maybe 2 or 3 clients, nothing big. So I had a lot of open time and availability to explore bodybuilding, and this is when I kind of made bodybuilding more of the thing that I was definitely doing, and putting more of my eggs into a basket. I did start actually in the other sector that I work in now. Like I work as a I do bodybuilding coaching, and I also work as an educational assistant for kids with special needs. And so that's when I started to work with special needs kids. Actually, was that time. So I had a bit of a 9 to 5 there. I think I was working 4 or 5 days a week there, from like 9 to 4, and then I was bodybuilding between that, basically, and doing a little bit of client stuff, but being very focused on bodybuilding during that time. And so it was a weird kind of transformation period where I was kind of like getting a different kind of career focus, getting kind of like growing out of the identity of being a first responder as well too, and pursuing more bodybuilding, which just seemed to be like, hey, this is what you seem to be good at, Connor. Let's keep moving forward. Let's see what we can get, right? And so it seemed to be like bodybuilding was the most validating thing I had in my life, to be honest. So I just kept putting my chips there, basically. So that's kind of what was going on. There was times when I was just barely working early on that prep. I had all this open time, and there was times where I was fairly busy with the day job and the prep, basically. And I think at some point too, everyone experiences it during prep, no matter what you have going on. If you're a kid in your mom's basement, or if you're working 2 jobs, you get to a point where you're kind of like fight or flight, and it feels like every moment of every day needs to be kind of planned out. At least that's how I experience it, because you're trying to fit in all your steps, you're trying to get your posing in, you're trying to take care of your skin, you're trying to get your diet, you're trying to get your training. It's very consuming. It can feel like a whole day's work just to get ready for the show. If you want to play it that way, if you want to obsess over every detail and timing and nuance and things like that, right? So I remember feeling like quite overwhelmed at times, for sure, just trying to get everything in, especially talking 25K steps. You're talking 3 hours of walking around, right? Plan that into your day. If you work 8 hours and train in the gym for 9 minutes and do some posing, right? So the time starts to add up, for sure. So I was definitely feeling very consumed by the process, for sure, but also always loved kind of riding. I don't know. I just kind of like how intense the experience is. Sometimes it's like, ooh, let's see how much we can take. How much can we tolerate here, basically. And that I kind of like doing that, and then finishing the season being like, yeah, we did some work. We did some work, boy. That's always been a gratifying feeling to me. So it's a weird cycle. It's up and down. It's highs and lows. You can go through a show day too and be up a minute, down 1 minute. You lose your competitor badge. You get first call out. You're panicking. You're stressed. You're on top of the world. It's quite the wave of emotions that go into competing, right? So
An emotional roller coaster. Yeah,
it is.
definitely.
It is. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
That's That's so relatable too. It's like the process of prepping, it can be like so difficult and time consuming and uncomfortable, but there's something about it, I think, like hunger, for example. Like sometimes you experience, I'll speak for myself, sometimes I experience hunger when I'm prepping, and it's like, man, I just don't want to be feeling this right now. Like, this sucks, I want to be fighting it. But there's other times where it's like, yeah, I want to be feeling this because it means I'm grinding, and I'm like, it's working, the diet's working, I'm getting closer to stage, and it's almost like it's a good feeling. You can like shift your perspective into making it into like a positive feeling, and like you're
Absolutely.
working towards something and it's working. But no, that's incredible. Like everything that you described, 25,000 steps, the transition between different careers, making it all mesh together, work together somehow. And then you ended up doing the competition, and that was when you won your pro card, which is amazing. What was that like? Like, so this is 2019, your first show was 2012. So that's 7 years of competing up to this point.
Yeah.
That must've been a cool feeling.
Yeah, man, it was the biggest dopamine rush you could ever get. I think I was on cloud nine for about 2 or 3 weeks after that. I still remember, like, it's in my head. Sometimes I'll just take myself back there, and I remember during the post down, they had some interesting music. They were playing like kind of old school like funk R&B stuff, and they played, I think the song is like "Mercy Me" by Marvin Gaye. I don't know if I have that title exactly right, but search Marvin Gaye and "Mercy Me" or something like that, it'll come up. And I still sometimes go back to that place and just remember what that post down was like, the energy I had, and just that feeling of being locked in and on stage and confident, right? Remember, I had a really good routine that year. I posted some Ariana Grande Seven Rings because I was backstage at my warm up show, and that was the most popular song at the time. And there was that kind of chorus like, I want it, I got it, I want it, I got it. And so I had someone do a voiceover being like saying that I was competing for the pro card, the pro status or whatever, and then it was just that I want it, I got it, like for the posing routine, right? And so I was like, I came in as confident as I could with the best stage presence I could, and I think that really shined through. People really saw that I wanted it, and it was close in the overall, man. I remember it was like I think the conditioning was there, compared to the heavyweight winner, but he was good, man. And some other federations might have put him ahead because of size, right? It was kind of a bit of an apples or oranges thing, but I had a lot of confidence. I had a lot of poise. I was entertaining. I think it kind of pushed me a little bit ahead of him for that overall win, right? So I remember just being on cloud nine, man. It was crazy. And like I can still go back to and think of that as one of my proudest moments for sure. I mean, the trophy's still back here somewhere, the big trophy, and it's still one of my proudest things that I've accomplished for sure. So I'll always look back to that as just like a great overall experience, and like totally for me worth it, man. Like, and even during those hard moments, like I still just soak it up. I'm just like, ooh, this is intense. I like this. And so to me, it's just all this big kind of like fun, wild ride that eventually, hopefully, ends up in like some sort of validation at the end for my work. And so it just seems to just work for me, I guess. I don't know. I never get bored of it. I never get tired of it.
Yeah, yeah. I think I remember seeing on your Instagram profile somewhere you got a post somewhere on there. It might be multiple posts that showcased the moment that you hear your name called on stage, and like I think I must have seen it like at least 2 years ago. It might have
Yep.
been on your Instagram profile for longer, but I have that image in my head of you hearing your name called and just like that moment, and you can see it on your face. It's like pure joy, as you noted, like this massive dopamine rush. Like wow.
I'm getting
So
tingles.
I
You're taking me back right now. I'm getting some tingles thinking about it. Yeah. 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 Hell
well
yeah.
yeah I man I it's just it's very cool. It's very you can see it. You can see the look on your face of just how impactful that moment was, which is
Yes.
amazing.
Absolutely, man. Yeah. Ooh, take me
Um,
back. Take me back.
well, okay, so there's a couple things I really want to ask you about.
Absolutely.
Um, before we get to it though, we still need to get to your next prep, which
Sure.
is 2022, right?
Yes, there was a almost got a COVID prep in there, but things get shut down. The world gets shut down for 2 years. So there was a show in 2020 at the time. WMBF wanted people to compete the next year after you won your pro card. So I was planning to compete. I think the next year in Calgary, but everything got shut down, so it got canceled, and they extended that pro card rule. So, and then even in 2021, kind of the same thing. They still had shows there, but I was too scared that they were going to get shut down. And fortunately, they were able to keep the pro status for me because of COVID. So, yeah, the next year would have been 2022. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Did you kind of stay like because it was kind of up in the air at the time, like are we going to have competitions, are we not going to have competitions? Were you kind of like keeping yourself from let's say getting up to 224 again? Like were you kind of staying on the leaner end just in case, or what was your strategy there?
I got up to 190 before I started that prep. So it was like kind of like leaner, but not so crazy lean that I couldn't enjoy a little bit of food and be like kind of a normative level of body fat, I would say. So I kept it tight-ish, I would say. Yeah,
Got it. Okay. And then so 2022, this was your pro debut then, right?
that's right. Correct.
So how did it go?
So I was still self-coaching at that time, and it went pretty well. I started the prep, I think, at around. I got up to around 207, 205, maybe. So I was still kind of on my bulking arc a little bit. But of course, as you get more muscles through the years, that 205, 207 looks a lot different than when you started 2012, right? Way, way different. So it was a kind of a long prep that had all these kind of like periods of dieting and maintenance. Um, I'm gonna make a reel off of it sometime. I remember talking to the 90 Days Daily people about it, and James goes, sounds like the process could have been more efficient. right? And it could have for sure. But I was kind of more on a lax approach to start, basically just kind of dieting a little bit and then maintaining for a little bit, dieting for a little bit, and so I think that was another year where I started in January and then ended in October, right? So it was long, it was slow, it was conservative for the most part, trying to maintain muscle mass. Maybe just trying to think about more of that than just get purely in condition or just trying to race my way to the stage. Just trying to take more of a chill approach was what I tried that year. And it was a good prep. It was solid. You know, I certainly didn't experience the levels of fatigue I did in 2019. I knew this whole volume food thing ain't gonna work. So I was very mindful of my digestion and what I was eating. To on the diet leading up. And then I did a lot of periods of like digging and then backing off. Like I might dig for 10 days and then back off for 3 or 4. So less of a weekly cycle, but more kind of intuitive in terms of that. And it was okay. It was all right. It did its job. So I get like dip my toes in a bit of fatigue, get a little flat, and then fill out for 3 days, recover a little bit, and then go again. Was kind of my approach that year. And certainly too got into some, still pushing the conditioning. It's like my body. Like I reflected on this the other day. I was like, it seems like my body's progression is just that it's able to give up more body fat each time. It's less about getting more roundness and density to the muscle, which was what I would like. I'd love to be that guy who just has these full round pecs, huge delts, and big arms, and crazy 3D muscle. But it seems like my muscle mass makes some slow improvements, but it seems the biggest difference is the level of body fat my body's just willing to give up each time. It's like it just like lets the reins off a little bit more. It's like, oh, we've done this before. We know you'll just survive a little bit easier, with this body fat coming off. Like we've seen it before. At least that's how it seems to me. At least, I mean, obviously there's still physiological challenges. You feel yourself slowing down. The sleep gets constrained. Food focus goes up. I get all those things every prep. I'm not immune to them, but it's like it takes longer and longer for that to happen. Seemingly every time I diet down, like my body has like muscle memory for fat loss or something. So So once again, I got tighter condition yet, and I pushed it towards the end. I pushed it hard. It's still on. I didn't do no 25K steps, but I was on 15K, and I was getting that 1,600, 1,700 calories towards the end. Feeling fatigued. Remember, finishing my day about 10 p.m. being like, whew, this is about as much as I can handle. I remember too that prep too. There was one really difficult moment where we had a tropical storm where I was living. I had no power or running water for 13 days.
Oh man!
And so that was a tough one too, man.
Stressful.
Trying to diet through that. Yeah, I remember buying
crap.
ice every night, going to the grocery stores that were open, getting the pre-cooked chicken, cans of tuna. Yeah. I was going a little bit loopy towards the end of that. Thankfully, at around a few weeks out, the power came back on. I think at 2 or 3 weeks out, the power came back on. So that was like a weight off my shoulders. But we were in a state of crisis back in PEI for that. So that was a tough one. But I think the lowest weight I got in that prep was again 170, but it was still just harder, leaner, tighter. And once again, self-coaching. The peak was like I was more cognizant of the amounts of carbs. I still think I missed it by about a day or so. I think I had my best luck Friday. I did kind of spill over just a touch, not too bad, but I certainly could have been maybe a little bit better on stage than I could have been. Given like an appropriate carb time up. But that year too, I was done a fat loss of 2 weeks out and built up my carbs like more of a slow metabolic building approach, like kind of Dr. Joe Consensi style. I didn't really have that much experience with that system, so it was kind of all of an experiment. So kind of just ramped carbs and food up slowly and reached a peak, and then kind of tried to back off to get kind of that max fullness and as much definition as I could. But I think I just erred on the side of spilling over a little bit too much. But all in all, it was still a pretty good showing. I was pretty happy. Third place in my pro debut, next to some heavy hitters like Alberto and Omar. Omar was the champion that year. So I felt once again pretty validated to get into a pro lineup and come top 3. That was a great feeling.
Well, that was the first year that I know that I found you on social media was through, I think, Alberto mentioning you on the 3DMJ podcast or one of his vlogs. He gave you a shout out from that show, being on stage with you, and I remember looking you up after that and being like, holy crap, you're talking about like pushing your conditioning even further. And I remember that was one of my impressions was like you got a ton of muscle and you're like ultra conditioned, and that started following you on Instagram from that point, and that's how I initially kind of
I remember
made that
it was
connection.
it was in the back of my head. I was like, I didn't know about this Omar guy who eventually won the show, but I was like, Alberto Nunez is doing it. He's got legendary conditioning. Well, I'm going to see how I stack up. I'm going to push
Yeah.
hard. I'm going to use him as motivation. And I think the conditioning was good. He's got quite the look on him, man. He's vascular, like and he really understands, the carb timing and stuff like that, and how to be kind of like full, but like straight through, on stage in terms of like getting everything in the right spot and showing up just, really, really lean vascular. And so, but he had also, had more muscle than me for sure. So, I mean, that combination he had was just definitely superior to mine for sure. But hey, man, he pushed me to be a better competitor, right? And to kind of just push that conditioning like I knew I could. So I felt very validated, being, comparable to someone as legendary as him. So that was awesome.
Yeah, yeah. I remember seeing like the stage photos briefly and being like, man, they all look like these are like world class competitors all on stage together. So
It's a great show that
yeah.
year. I loved it.
Do you typically like your approach like each season you do a single show and then you kind of start your process into the improvement season after that, or would you typically do multiple shows?
The last few years I've done multiple. Actually, the next week after that show, I did the Monster Mash in Boston, and I really
Right.
flopped. I really flopped. My look was not good, and this is where maybe we can start to transition to talking to working with Brandon, because he's helped me a lot during this transitional period where I did
Yeah,
shows back to
yeah.
back. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so I actually, I saw some of the same things this year on prep that I would have in 2022, and I just did not know how to navigate them, my man. And sometimes you get a little like when you do back to back shows, you get fatigued. You spend a lot of time doing things that aren't necessarily conducive to maintaining muscle mass. You do a lot of pumping up with like light weights. You cause a lot of fatigue. You get a lot of fatigue from travel. You don't sleep as well. And so it's really easy to like get poor quality stimulus on the muscle that way and also get very fatigued, right? So that the one thing Brandon told me is like the fatigue will affect the look at the physique, right? And so,
Right.
like between those two shows in 2022, I saw myself flatten out more, just lose kind of that pop. And then, of course, I tried to overcarb to compensate, right? And so I ended up being like, remember at the Monster Mash the next week in 2022, I weighed the exact same weigh-in, but the look was not as good. It was just diminished, right? And so that was in my head too. I was like, how do I maintain between shows? Like, what did I miss? And I thought, well, the training wasn't great, the fatigue was high, and you carved up too much, Connor. Once again, you made the same mistake that you even made, that you said, you wanted to no longer work with coaches because they don't understand, they're not following you close enough. They don't understand how your body reacts to carbs, but I still made that same mistake, that error. And of course, in the Monster Mash, that's a way even more stack show than the Calgary was. Going up against guys like Gary Amlinger, it's like, ooh, you better be full and try and be comparable, right? So once again, ran out the carbs a little bit too much. Fatigue was high. Training wasn't as good as it could have been. So I ended up looking kind of soft and just spilled and flat on stage at the same time. Not a good combination. Yeah.
Something that I'm really curious about that you mentioned and you quick kind of brazed over is learning kind of the difference between like good stimulus and not good stimulus. Like you'd kind of go train, get a bit of a pump, you'd feel fatigued, but like I
Yeah.
think you kind of mentioned like maybe that wasn't the best stimulus. Can you describe, and maybe this is what you've learned from working with Brandon Kempter. Can you kind of describe like what have you learned about the difference between like a good training stimulus versus maybe one that's not as good as you think it is?
Yeah. Well, I don't think our conversations have centered too much around that, but it was also a lot of reflecting on my own too about, okay, what did I do that show day weekend? Well, Calgary, I was nervous, right? And so I spent a lot of time trying to look at myself nonstop as I was self coaching, right? So I don't have the plan. I just have like me as a person being reactive to what I'm seeing, which is maybe not the best way to go about it if you're self coaching. Maybe it's better to treat yourself like a client, send yourself a peak week, and then follow it and be like, okay, you'll check in at these times, and then try and pretend, just cut your own head off and look at your body, right? So I remember just like nervously, like over and over, like flexing my glutes, flexing my quads, all the lines through, just cause it like nonstop fatigue, like nonstop kind of perseverating over how my physique was looking, kind of being my own worst enemy at that point, right? And so that's what led me to wanting to have a coach eventually, was because I was like, man, I'm not managing myself well in terms of like my mentality, and I'm the self coaching thing is making me kind of crazy at this point, especially too being at a higher level and having like not necessarily like pressure, but just a bit of experience behind your name, and people like, oh, this Connor St. Jean guy, he's competed for a while, and you get in your head like, I better show up, I better show up, I better show up, right? And so that that me being more of like the nervous, anxious type kind of leads to like overly checking the physique, just doing too much pumping up, too much things that are causing fatigue, right? Too many nerves, basically, right? So I think that would have played into it. And with the coach, you check in when you're supposed to check in. You can take a little bit of that stress off, and then you can, as long as the coach is following you pretty well, they're probably gonna do a pretty good job of nailing those factors. And they're kind of emotionally removed from it a little bit. Like there might be a little bit of emotion there because they're a client that want you to do well, but they can see it for what it is, and they're hopefully well fed over in their part of the world, and can make kind of smooth choices for you. And so that I think certainly helped me out so far this year working with Brandon. I do think that there's something to be said for like, you want to maintain muscle, you got to get real mechanical tension on the muscle. And if you're just pumping up bands a lot and doing kind of pump workouts the last week, there might be something to be sacrificed. If you overcarb and understimulate, you might gain a little bit of fat, lose a little bit of muscle. Might not be much, but hey, if you're fatigued and your training sucks and you overeat, yeah, you can go down. You can go downhill.
Right. Okay. Well, I want to know more about you working with Brandon.
Absolutely.
And I want to know more about your current prep. But before that, can you talk about a prep going into last year, 2024? I think you prepped going into last year, right?
Correct. Yep.
Can you talk on that? You did an entire prep for a 2024 season. Can you talk about what that was like and how that went?
Absolutely. So I remember too. It's it makes me sad looking back, but I remember being at 2022, having the greatest time at the Calgary show, and I told Leo, King, the promoter, I was like, I will be back in 2024. This is awesome, great show, smoothly run. They do a great job at that show in Calgary. 10 out of 10 experience, amazing. So I wanted to come back and do it again. I wanted to win. Like anyone else, or I want to at least advance myself, or just at least show a better physique. Well, one of the three, right? And so, I put the plan together to do that. And during that time too, I moved provinces, changed jobs, basically. And so I started my prep, I think it was again around January time. I think I was still around that 205 mark, probably a little bit better. And I dieted all the way till about the end of September, 3 weeks out. And then so at that time, the relationship I was in, she had a family member that needed some help, and there wasn't a whole lot of help to be given from her family situation. So I ended up flying out and just kind of choosing to prioritize that situation over the contest prep. And given the circumstances of what was surrounding that, it seemed like it was just impossible to kind of save the prep while doing that. So I made the conscious choice to drop out of the prep to help out, these people at the time, which I think still was probably the best choice I could have made at the time. Although it did leave me feeling kind of heartbroken that I wasn't getting on stage. I won't lie. But yeah, I basically done a full prep, and I was quite lean at that time. Like I would have been, stage conditioning for sure, like very close, maybe just putting the finishing touches at 3 weeks out. And so I had to make the choice to shut it down. And like all the flights and stuff we had booked for Calgary went to You're into the Woods in Kelowna actually, and didn't get refunded for the hotel. WMBF Canada, I will say, they gave me a refund on the entry fee. Thank you very much, guys. You're very, very kind to me. So yeah, all the air miles and stuff went to that, and so that's where I had to prioritize my energy at the time. And so that was certainly a disappointment, man. But coming off that, the fire still burns. And ooh, if you don't satisfy my itch for bodybuilding, boy, is it gonna grow. Grow. So after that, I got I think too, one of the issues with that year too is my off season was kind of not as what I wanted it to be. Some of that too was just kind of the way my relationship was functioning. I was having a hard time actually giving what I wanted to bodybuilding and being, kind of in that situation with that person at that time. So it was like really, really tough to like put in the off season I wanted to. So, after that show, and a few weeks after that experience in Kelowna, like me and that partner parted ways. There was a lot of issues there that I was unhappy with for a long time. So even though I feel like I made the right choice, there was also some things there that kind of showed me, hey, we have to move forward in life with some other things here too, right? And we need to do what makes us happy, and that's the situation was quite bad in a lot of ways. So,
Right.
you know, the fire was really there to get back into bodybuilding, and then that off season between then and now was just like everything was just meticulous, right? Bed 8 p.m., calories perfectly counted, training perfectly logged. I started to work with a posing coach in the off season. Shout out to my posing coach Laura, Lauren Lazahala on Instagram. She helped me out a lot. So it was like I was just fully in bodybuilding mode that whole off season, right? And so I knew too I wanted to come back and kind of like save some of the fat loss I had done, but still trying to make some improvements to my physique along the way. So I ended up getting up slowly, and like it's funny. I have the weigh-ins here from November 2024. Looks like November 2024, the 30th, I was 177.2. And then so I slowly ramped up to about a max off-season weight at the end of my off-season, which would have been around May of this year, to about 186, I think was my top weigh-in. So I still was in a
Right.
surplus, but it was very slow, very controlled, and I was conservative with it. And the training effort was like maximized. And I also looked at a bunch of things like analyzing form. Because the big thing, if you listen to the 90s Daily podcast, or even I think Eat, Train, Prosper podcast not long ago, was talking about kind of changing my techniques up for training chest. And so that seemed to make a big difference in terms of my overall, fullness to my pecs. I changed a lot of my technique there. And so even without a big surplus or anything, that seemed to like kind of move me forward in some certain body parts that I just wasn't kind of clicking on. And so that was kind of like enough. I didn't seem to need a big surplus. I just kind of like fixed some training errors, refined my approach again, and then started the prep for this year, which was like way shorter in duration, but of course a very, very lean starting point, right? So that's kind of how that went. Yeah.
How did you find the difference of this relatively short improvement season of kind of staying within like 15 to 16 pound striking distance of your stage weight? Did you find like it was less comfortable, like it was noticeably less comfortable than like your past preps where you get up to 205 or um, 20 pounds heavier than that even? Like, did you find it was a special kind of a challenge to keep yourself from gaining much more weight than that? Or were you so like, did you have so much fire built up from not from having to basically cancel the prior season that like you were cool with it, you're okay with kind of staying in that leaner kind of uh,
I would say
range?
yes to both questions. There was some very, very challenging times coming out of that and trying to just slowly ramp it up. Because after just leaving that relationship, I had to find a new place. I worked a third job to make needs meet to make my income where I wanted it to be for a while. After a while I felt I didn't need the third job, so I dropped it. But there was times when I was like working at school all day, doing client updates, and then driving to my job at night and being on like 2,500 calories and finishing my food at 6 p.m., having to work till 11, and then wake up to train the next day at 4 a.m. and being
It's
like,
crazy.
dude, no, this is tough. But I did have that fire, and I was, like I said, my itch was unscratched, right? And my
Well, I'm just
motivation.
thinking like, I mean, I'm just thinking like it sounds like you're on full throttle basically, and this is like after like a full prep, and then like you're continuing to go full throttle, everything that
Mhm,
you've described going on all cylinders, and I'm just
mhm.
thinking, man, there's not a lot of people that could or would do that. It's crazy.
I had felt like the previous 2 years up to that, like my bodybuilding fire was like being suppressed basically. And so it was kind of like a reactionary thing to all the things I had going on in my life. It's I really wanted, it was like, it felt like taking back control of my life basically from the situation I was in before. And so like to me, I do that with bodybuilding, right? So it was kind of like an emotional thing at the same time too. So there was a little bit of that. And bodybuilding is like always like my fallback. It's like my safe place. It's like, ooh, I can put all my energy and time into here, and it's going to pay off, right? Basically, it's kind of that on an emotional level going into it. But it was hard, man. Like there was a lot of days, like in November time, like I wanted to eat more than I was eating, absolutely every single day, without lie. And then at a certain point, it leveled out a little bit. Like I remember like getting up to the 180s, 185. It's like, ooh, okay, Diet Coke doesn't taste good anymore. Okay, so we got ourselves to safety, but there was some struggles in there. I remember going home to seeing my parents for Christmas break, and kind of wanted to be off tracking, but also still staying lean. So like still kind of like under eating and then having like Christmas dinner and stuff like that. Some hunger between meals was like pretty intense, but just trying to stay focused basically. So I'm not gonna lie, man, it was hard. It was
Yeah.
hard in terms of like maintaining the conditioning and still trying to like train through it and just be okay. But it was doable and it did push me forward, you know? For the right
Yeah.
person in the right time, it's doable, but it's not for everyone every single time.
Um, I want to I want to talk about the season that you're in right now, and this is all leading up to your current season. I want to talk a little bit more, if you got time,
Let's go.
about working with Brandon. Um, but before that, just quickly rewinding, if you're open to it, we just
Yeah.
kind of skimmed past this, but
Yeah.
you mentioned like the 2 years prior to this, you kind of had to suppress your love of bodybuilding, at least to some extent. And I know you were in a prior relationship, and it like you left the relationship after 3 weeks of canceling the prep. It sounds like from what you described, it was definitely the right thing to do. It was like the noble thing to do. It sounds like it was really, really tough, but from what you shared, it sounds like it was definitely the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about what you mean when you say you had to kind of suppress your fire for bodybuilding, I suppose, and what that looked like, what that meant. Was it related to the relationship you were in? And if this is like kind of a sensitive topic, we can like just whatever you're open to sharing.
Yeah, I'll do my best to talk about this in a way that doesn't like make the other half of the relationship seem bad. But you know, there was a lot of needs in that relationship that took up a lot of my space, and so trying to keep things feeling emotionally good between me and my partner at the time, it kind of meant uh, you know training at my apartment gym instead of driving to a real gym. Right? It kind of meant you know finding a dietary approach that worked for both of us, right? Which maybe was like less tracking, less specifics, more meals out, more Uber Eats, things like that, and that just to kind of keep things feeling good between us. Like there was a lot of sacrifices on the bodybuilding front, right? And I was kind of just playing with that to see how it made me feel, and I suppressed a lot of these emotions too. I'll be honest. I kind of just was going through it, not really knowing what was happening, and so a more emotionally um, mature version of myself probably would have recognized this sooner and had that conversation. Unfortunately, though, I'm not perfect. I welled up a lot inside of myself during that time, and then it kind of all spilled out, right? Basically, in a way. So, that's kind of what was going on there. So I just wasn't really doing things to the level I would have liked to, and the demands of everything that was going on in my life just kind of made it so bodybuilding was on autopilot, so it was still going. I was still doing it. Like it's hard for me to shut it off. It's kind of in my head a lot, but it just wasn't the same level of meticulousness and the same level of working to my standard basically in terms of what I would like to do and how I would approach it. And so that took its toll on me over time. And so once I was in a different situation, I just really did exactly what I love to do again, which is just be right in this shit, right? So that's kind of how that unfolded. I hope that makes sense.
Totally. And thanks for sharing that too. Honestly, I think a lot of people, a lot of natural bodybuilders can relate to that. They've experienced, they've experienced similar situations, similar contexts. So I think it's helpful to get to hear you talk about your experience at least a little bit, um, just to show that, hey, maybe the person listening, they're not the only person out there that has had similar feelings being in a prep and feeling that way if they're in a relationship and
Yeah,
so on and so forth. So
yeah.
I think it's really helpful.
I would say too, like, don't suppress your emotions. Really look inside yourself and be honest. Communicate that to your partner. Communicate that to the closest people in your life. Talk to a therapist if it helps. Don't suppress things. Let it come out because it's gonna amount to something you're not gonna want if you're gonna suppress it, right? So I learned not to do that pretty hard. That experience. So yeah.
Yeah. Super, super helpful advice. Okay. 2024, you described how that went. It was tough. It's kind of like it was kind of like your prep just never ended, basically. I mean, just in some way, like you gained weight back, but it was still very controlled and very structured, even more structured potentially.
Yep.
And then here we are now in finally 2025, your season. So, can you share how this current season is going and talk a little bit more about working with Brandon Kempter?
Absolutely. So, yeah, 2025, my plan was to do a short prep and to do a longer season. Now, it's funny, things are playing out a little bit differently than I expected now that I'm kind of in the thick of it. But I did start my prep around May time, I believe. I wanted to start 15 weeks out of my first show, but I got a stomach bug, and it seemed like it took me a while to recover from that. And I was really worried about just starting with like a bit of fullness as well too, and not being kind of like, you know, just after, if you ever had gastroenteritis, man, does that flatten you out? Pretty good. So I probably could have started. I probably could have just hit the ground running after that, but I decided to take a few weeks, and so I only started my prep 12 weeks out of the first show, right? And so I started actually self-coaching myself at first and just getting into it slowly. And I decided, it was kind of an impulse decision, but I was talking to, my now partner, and I was like, you know what? I kind of want to work with a coach. I think that would help me. And she was like, go for it, go for it. And I was like, the only coach I want to work with is Brandon. I respect him so much. He's, his physique is top level. Look at his client resume. His clients are stacked. He brings the goods every time. And so I as well too messaged him a few times in 2022, being like, man, I got to work with you. Like, I think that would help me a lot in these high pressure situations, right? And so I started with him only 8 weeks out, actually, and I'm very, very, very thankful that he was able to take me on, because I think Brandon's style is like, he usually wouldn't do that, But since I had a little bit of rapport built with him, I feel like he made a special exception for me. And so that, Brandon, if you're listening, thank you so much for that. That's I know that's a special thing you did for me. And so I started working with him 8 weeks out, and he kind of took over what I was already doing. I showed him my spreadsheet, I showed him my training. He was like, "This looks good. Well, we're just going to keep kind of rolling, and I'll just take over the reins, basically." And so he took over the reins. The diet was more aggressive from the get go. I knew it had to be. I knew there was no time to kind of mess around, basically. And of course, I've dieted lots of times, so I know it's roundabout where my calories and expenditure need to be to make things work. And so, starting off that prep, we're talking, 1,900 calories right away, basically, decent amount of steps, and seeing the body fat go down pretty quickly, and then still doing some high days. But then, yeah, just kind of like aggressively dieting, kind of from the get go, from a lean starting point, and just trying to hold everything together as well as we could. And, I was surprised too. Like, Brendan, he's competitive, man. He doesn't relent. He gets the results he wants, and that man makes zero mistakes, I must say, or very, 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 very seldom does he overlook any detail or anything that's going to affect his client's progress. So he's very, very good in the way he pays attention to detail, and he's very, very good in the way he kind of gets you fired up about the process. And he's a real coach, man. He's not someone who's focusing overly on just the macros or the training. Like, those things are important, but he's kind of getting you fired up in every aspect you can to bring your best physique to stage, mentally, physically, emotionally, everything. He's great at that. So, is there any specific questions you have about his approach that are, to me, it's all felt kind of like just like good, solid dieting with like refeeds in the mix. But if anything you want to ask, go for it.
Yeah, actually, just that last point you mentioned, like he's really good at firing you up, and not just like about macros and training, but everything. Like, can you talk more on that? Like, how?
Bro, it's just his
Yeah,
aura.
just elaborate.
It's his aura. He's got high energy, high positivity. I feel like our personalities match quite well. I feel like we're pretty similar. Like, we would do a lot of things the same way. And so, like, he fires me up. Like, and so someone else who has a different personality, they might not get that from him maybe as much. He does do it very well, I think, for all his clients, and finds the way to communicate them that works. But I think it's just his aura matching my aura in a special kind of way. Like, he's the guy I can like fully trust and fully put my, just totally have the most respect for him, basically. And just, it just gets me going the way he communicates. And, he's to the point. He says all the things he needs to say, but no more, no less. And if you have any questions, he'll address them promptly and accurately. And then we just get to work. So, that's kind of how he operates. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when you. It would be like 13, 14 weeks ago now, something like that, where you initially posted on your Instagram story, like, "Hey, I'm working with Brandon Kempter now." And I was like really excited because I'd seen your conditioning up to that point, and I was like, holy crap. Brandon's kind of, at least from my perspective, like I always thought of him as like, especially with his own physique and for some of the other photos I've seen of his other athletes, like he's known for getting himself and his other competitors like tight. Like, I mean, like
Yeah.
tight. So I was really excited when I saw you mention that you were working with them. And
Yep.
I got to say, like seeing your first couple of shows, the photos that you posted so far of your own look, it's been pretty incredible to see like your level of conditioning and fullness and how much muscle you've held with being so tight. How have you find um how have you found the first couple of competitions that you've done so far, like the peaking process and just working with him in that
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. So we did 2 shows back to back, and the goal for the like there that he both me and him were kind of like mostly me, not so much him. But I was stressed about spilling over, right? And so I know that like I know things like I can't have too much food the day of the show. I can't have all these carbs in my system, yada yada. Yada. Or I had all these preconceived ideas about it. And so he kind of took me and he kind of knew the look and he gave me a very conservative carb up approach. And he's big on like arithmetic too. He's like, hey man, there's math involved here. He's like, they're virtually impossible to spill over here, but just make sure your food sources are in check. Eat things that digest, fairly quickly and efficiently, be on that minimum step count, and you'll be good to go. And so, this is where the trust component is big because someone else, if they said that to me, I might not trust them. I might not have as much respect for them as I have Brandon, right?
Right.
So that was, a key factor there. And it was hard for me too. Like I will say, I struggled a little bit mentally to be like, ooh, am I going to spill? Am I going to spill? What's going to happen? Am I going to get ankles on stage again? Um, even though that wasn't a thing at all, it didn't happen. There's no chance of that. But basically the carb up approach was a little bit more conservative for the first show, and we were still dieting hard right to that final week before the first show, and then getting quite flat, and the flatness was concerning. The amount of flatness was I was concerned with that too, right? So on one end I'm concerned about being too flat, and the other end I'm concerned about spilling, right? So this is where the trust is huge. And so I think the first show, it was like the first day of carbing up on a Wednesday, it was like 320 carb. The next day was like planned to be 200, but ended up being like 250 or something. And then the last day was supposed to be 180, but got bumped up to 220. So it was like pretty conservative on the carbs, but it was a good look. I was pretty happy. Like I definitely wasn't on the fuller end of the spectrum, but it was like a physique that is like a little filled out that had all that separation visible. And you know what? Dang nabbit, I really wanted to get on stage like that. Not totally just like carved up to max, but just showing that max detail that I can show. And so I felt very satisfied doing it that way the first round, right? And so I think I would have been more competitive with a little bit more carbs in the mix for sure, because the muscle density matters in the lineup quite a bit. The shred up pictures by yourself, they look damn cool, but then you got to get up against other dudes, right? And so if you get someone in a picture who's just peeled out of their mind, they're going to look big and muscular, but you're not comparing yourself to other people at that point, right? You're just looking peeled by yourself. You get some good lighting. You don't even really have to have that much muscle to look cool, right? So that's kind of the physique I displayed there, which is amazing for some of the backstage photos, amazing on the stage by myself, but maybe not the best in the lineup. So Brandon was like, hey, Connor, I think there's a little bit more room to fill this physique out. And I was like, I agree. And of course, I had lost in the bodybuilding class to some denser guys who weren't quite in my condition. So I was very open to carving up more. And so the next week, I started to flatten out pretty quickly, actually. So even on Tuesday, he started to carb me up. I think the first day was 320 carbs. The next day, 320 repeated again. I think the Thursday was more like 250. And then the Friday was more like 200, and that's around where we stayed, and we got fuller for sure. Like it was, that would have been an extra like 300-400 grams of carbs compared to the previous week, and so that was more of like was closer to like being fully glycogenated. I would say like not definitely didn't spill over. There was no periods of that, but it was like close to that like 90-95% fullness mark. That was that got on stage, and that was more competitive for sure. It's a more competitive look. I was able to compare a little bit better to some of the denser guys that way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've seen both sets of photos of what you've shared from each competition. I thought both looks, honestly, from my eyes, like I thought both looks were really, really incredible.
If you really look at it, you'll see there's more upper glutes in the first show. There's a little bit more wild detail in the arms and stuff like that. But I'm also like smaller. There's way less muscle volume. So it's like, the the conditioning matters, but it's kind of like to a threshold where it's like you just got to get lines kind of everywhere, and then you do kind of want to maximize fullness, and like you
Yeah.
do lose a bit of that like sinewy look, that kind of flat look a little bit, but you get a lot of
Yeah.
muscle volume back and you pop more. So I always need a little bit more pop. The condition is usually pretty good, but the pop is like some of the front poses, the chest and the delts. There's something there that could maybe be a little bit better for sure. So yeah,
Right. Okay. Well, I know you've got another thing coming up here, and I want to be respectful of your time.
yeah.
Um, I guess the last question I I'd love to ask you is just what are your plans for the rest of the season? I think I saw that you posted like, hey, WMBF shows are up next. Like, let's
Yeah.
go. Can you describe with whatever detail you're open to sharing, like how the rest of your season plans are, what your big goals are, and where you're aiming to aim yourself?
Absolutely. My lofty goal at the start of prep was to make it all the way to Calgary again in October. I've since decided that that's not going to be the case. I'm going to do one WMBF Pro show, and then I'm going to shut things down. So the next show I have is the WMBF Pro US Cup in Connecticut, United States. I think we're 26 days out or 25 days out now from that. So my plan is to finish the season there and then call it a success, basically, no matter what the result is. So you know, with contest conditioning and maintaining it this long, even bringing your calories up to maintenance level, which I'm at now, you certainly feel a lot better, but there's still just something to be desired in terms of like energy, and in terms of like just kind of the cycles you go into between meals. It's just not the same as being, in the surplus, even though it's much easier to kind of ambulate, to train. And it's a cool period too, because you can gain back some fullness to the muscle. You can kind of train to the level you want again. So I think there's just a little bit to be taken in terms of coming in stage fuller, fresher, better. But after that, there's really nothing more to explore in terms of getting more of this physique at this time. So my goal is to just get the max I can, show up on stage better, and then call it a success.
That makes sense. I think it's better to basically stop once you've got the most you possibly can out of the prep. Then it's kind of
Yeah.
like, well, I could keep going, but the experience might not be as good. I might not get the best results. So might as well
Yeah.
stop when I'm ahead and have a great experience. And you've already accomplished a lot. So
And hey, I'll be honest, like, the prep does wear you down over time. So, I do want to get back to regular things as much as I love bodybuilding and being, in the zone and after it and competing and all the stuff that goes into that. Hey man, I also want to chill out a little bit because I want to have that feeling at the end where I was like, boy, we did some work. It was good, but now it's
you
time
can
to get
have
back.
that, you
It's
can
time to
have
get back
finally have
to,
that breath of relief. Yeah. It's been like a
yeah.
2-year prep basically for you.
Yeah.
So.
So I am absolutely ready to be done and ready to execute for the next 25 days. But after that, it's time to pack things up for a bit. So that's kind of where I've been at.
Incredible, man. Well, I think this is an awesome spot to close our conversation, and I want to say a huge thank you for meeting with me and having the conversation. I've learned a lot from getting to hear about your whole story, like a ton. So this has been really cool for me. I think everyone that listens is gonna love to hear about the journey that you've been on. Really appreciate your time. What are the best links to share in the description below if they're interested in working with you or they want to learn more about you? Is Instagram the best place, or what should I post in the description?
Yeah, I'd say Instagram's probably the best place to find me. So at Connor.stjean. My last name is St. Jean. I put the dot in the middle because it looks more aesthetic. So Connor.stjean on Instagram. Find me there. If you want to DM me, there's also a discovery link in the profile. So if you're interested in working with me, I'd love to have you. Yeah, so the Instagram would probably be the best way to hit me up.
Sweet. And I'll include the link below. So everyone who's interested, check that. Thank you again for this. It was awesome.
Thanks so much, Sam. I had a great time. Looking forward to seeing more of your stuff soon.